Now, Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon.
Bonjour et bienvenue, or as we say in English, welcome to Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Joining me on the phone this episode from Overkill, it is Bobby Blitz and from Metal Allegiance, Mark Menghi. Now, the two of them have gotten together with Mike Portnoy, yes, of the Winery Dogs, Sons of Apollo, and other fabulous places, and guitarist Phil Demmel. And they have put together a new band called BPMD, right? The initials. So brilliant, so brilliant. You gotta love Easy. I love Easy. Anyway, they have a new album coming out in June of 2020, assuming that some of you might be listening to this in 2021 at some point. The album is called American Made, and it covers American bands. See? Look at that. Mostly from the 70s. You've got on there covers by Ted Nugent, Aerosmith, Cactus, ZZ Top, and all kinds of other stuff. Now, the good songs, yes, I know, that suggests there's bad songs. There's no bad songs. It's a great album. But Toys in the Attic and Wang Dang Sweet Poontang, the Aerosmith cover and the Ted Nugent cover, are songs that were picked by Mike Portnoy. And as we discussed through the interview, they have a concept of doing more albums covering American bands from the 80s, British bands from the 70s, so on and so forth. And I got to tell you, let Mike do the picking. Just say, hey, Mike, pick 10 songs and we'll cover them. And listen, it's American-made rock from the 70s, no Kiss. No Kiss. I'm telling you. Still, jokes aside, because I am joking, I'm being facetious, please. The album American Made is coming out in June. Do check that out. I am going to get right to the interview. Let's call this a hit and run episode. It is a short interview, short intro. Here is from BPMD, Bobby Blitz and Mark Menghi. Les voilà. We are speaking with Mark Menghi and Bobby Blitz. The new band is BPMD. The new album is called American Made. It's out June 12th. And, of course, it features the band covering songs by Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, and more. As we say in Montreal, bonjour, monsieur. Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Bonjour, Mitch.
Yes. So let us help the fans out here, because we've got two people on the line, and they're going to hear you talk, and some may or may not know. So let me start with Mark. Good day, Mark. How are things?
Things are good, man. Things are good, besides the global crisis going on.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And, of course, Mark does Metal Allegiance and all kinds of other great stuff. And Bobby from the great Overkill, which Bobby, I have to say, the first time I saw the band, it was at that Eddie Trunk show, Eddie Trunk sponsored show, if you want, right after 9/11 with Sebastian Bach, Ace Frehley, Anthrax.
I was there. I was at that gig. New York Steel.
Am I missing anybody? It was Anthrax, Sebastian Bach,
Anthrax
Ace
was
Frehley.
there. Yeah, Twisted.
That's who I'm missing.
Ace Frehley. Yeah, I mean that was a monumental event after a monumental event. So that was it was good to be part of that.
Yeah, that was just one epic kind of thing, and you've got to sort of thank Eddie Trunk for all he's done for rock and metal over the years. Always a pleasure to be involved with anything he's doing. So let's talk about American Made. Let me go to you, Mark, first. Talk to me about these bands and how you got to choose them. We've got Ted Nugent, Aerosmith, Cactus, ZZ Top. What was the concept behind this, and why sort of stick to American Made? Why not cover, the Rolling Stones and Def Leppard and all these other bands? Why stick to American bands?
Sure. We wanted to challenge ourselves as musicians. And when the idea was spawned last summer, I suggested Saturday Night Special by Leonard Skinner after my son had suggested it to me. And that kind of set the light bulb off. And when I spoke to Blitz that night, he started mentioning these other great American bands. And as this idea was starting to percolate, starting to brew, it was, we're expected to do Sabbath and Priest and Maiden, Deep Purple, et cetera, which we love. They're some of our favorite bands ever. But it was, what could we do that's different, that really hasn't been done, and challenge ourselves. And so we set the ground rules that we each get to pick 2 songs. We can't argue those songs. So if Blitz picked his 2 songs, nobody in the band could argue it. You had to do it. So there's 8 songs there. Then we had 2 community picks. Then to amplify it even more, we said, you know what? It's got to be released in the 70s. So we started naming artists or songs. Can't do that. That was released in December of 1969. Can't do it. So, we didn't pigeonhole ourselves, but we really kind of opened up to challenge ourselves. So it was just kind of built that way. And it was all done pretty organically, too. It wasn't, we didn't come up with an idea and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do. It was just done via, group text or email, and even in person as well.
See, I love this. So let me go to you, Bobby. First song on the album is, of course, Wang Dang Sweet Poontang by Ted Nugent from the Cash Scratch Fever album, produced by a friend of mine, Tom Werman. Talk to me about covering Ted, because these days when you talk Ted Nugent and you put stuff out right away, there's an incredible amount of online hate about, Ted, and yet you cover him. And such a great song. Talk to me a bit about Ted.
Oh, geez, it's funny. We never thought about any of that. I mean, I've always just been a fan of Ted. It wasn't one of my picks. It was actually Mike Portnoy's. But the fun part about this song for me is that when I tried to channel my inner Ted Nugent or Amboy Dukes or 1970s Ted, I was listening to get ready for this cut. Was listening to Double Live Gonzo. So I remember being in the studio with the guy I worked with for all the Overkill stuff for the last, 10 years or so, a guy named Johnny Rod. And I said, turn it on. And he turned it on, and I rattled off that intro that was something very similar to that of the Double Live Gonzo recorded in Nashville, Tennessee back in the 70s. So it was like, let's say, revisiting the youth when getting into the Ted stuff and then doing that live introduction.
I just want to point out,
yeah,
you mentioned the Ted, hate, like Bobby said, we never thought politics. And I realized this after we were done recording. Ted is pro-gun. We have a song on there that's anti-gun, which is Saturday Night Special. That's an anti-gun song. So if you think about it, on this record, there's a pro-gun guy and there's an anti-gun guy. So we're right in the middle, man. This is 100% about music. There's zero politics on this record.
Yeah, it's funny. I've interviewed Ted twice in the last 6 months and I do it because I really want to focus on just the music. I don't want to do politics. And yet whenever I put the interviews up, I get a whole bunch of, I'm going to unfollow you. You're a horrible person. And it's just like, well, anyway. Quickly, let's get into the producers of that. Tom Werman produced that. He's also produced Cheap Trick and a bunch of other great artists. Talk to me a little bit about Tom. Do you know anything about his production past Ted and Tom and Cheap Trick? And how do you sort of rank him in terms of producers when we look at the Bob Rocks and the Bob Ezrins and the Mutt Langs? How do you sort of compare Tom Werman to those guys?
Ooh. You got it, Mark, or me?
Let's go with Bobby first, and then we'll get to Mark.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Tom is all over the board with regard to what hard rock was, and let's say introducing it to that of the public, American around the world. And when you start looking at the stuff that he he had his fingers in, or controlling, and his ears, it goes from like Ted and some of that. Even that, heavier Southern rock bands, Molly Hatchet, something like that. Blue Oyster Cult, who we also cover on this record. So, So he's probably one of the linchpins that is a commonality in more than one of the songs that we have picked for the BPMD release.
Great stuff. Real quick, Mark, in terms of putting this together, whose idea was this? And is this sort of a one-off kind of thing? Or if this does well, do we look at doing an American-made 80s album, an American-made 90s album, maybe do a 70s UK-made? What are sort of the long-term prospects and projects for this?
Wow, he kind of nailed it. What do you think, Bobby?
I think that's right on the head. I think the point of this was to make sure that it had legs. And those legs were going to be made in the UK or made in Europe, made in the world, if we wanted to take it a step further.
Yeah, now the goal, this was just out of love, man, and fun. Again, an 8-year-old came up with the original light bulb idea, if you want to trace it back, and it was just 4 dudes getting in a room covering some tunes, and we hit the record button. This is all pre-label. We didn't have a record label. We self-financed it. We just did it out of love. There was really no preconceived master game plan. I still think we're trying to figure it out as we go. And, it's fun. I love working with Bobby and the guys, and it was kind of inevitable that at least Blitz and I branched out to do something, because him and I, with Metal Allegiance, we had a good chemistry. Obviously Mike and Phil as well. That's kind of how this thing started, because we've jammed a lot of shows together. We've played together. We know the stage. We all know what we could do playing wise. And it was fun. It was fun. And the goal is to definitely branch out and to do other things, of course. But we're hoping this has legs, and we hope people dig our renditions of these songs. And again, it's 4 guys having fun. It's really, really nothing more than that.
Yeah, well, listen, it sounds like a fun album. I've obviously heard parts of it, and I'm digging the heck out of it. Bobby, I'll send this to you. In terms of vocals and vocal style, what Ted Nugent does and what Steve Tyler and all these guys, obviously it's different. How is it for you vocally to get into these songs and make them your own, but also somewhat still pay tribute to the guys that you're covering?
Well, I mean, that's the key right there. And I think what you're talking about is presentation. I learned a long time ago, it's just pretty much me. It's not that I can copy or another singer. But I remember just in a recent interview, somebody asked me something similar. And I learned the lesson way back in, the early Overkill days when we were doing some covers. And I realized I'm not Steven Tyler. There's one Steven Tyler. So the idea is to present it your own way with keeping that in mind of who was the original, not necessarily trying to mimic it, but more so pay homage to it by individual presentation or personalized presentation. So for me, it was that was the idea, was to keep the integrity of the song, but also keep the integrity of the fact that my voice is recognizable, and how does it fit with this music, and how does it fit from the presentation of that original singer? How do I bring both together and make an original presentation out of it?
Any of the vocals that were difficult for you to cover?
The David Lee Roth stuff is not easy for me. Again, like there's one Steven Tyler, there's one David Lee Roth. I mean, that's just the way it is. Where I picked, for instance, the Cactus and the Mountain songs, which are a little bit more blues based type tunes. So, I mean, I fit right into that kind of a blues category with my delivery, which is or my natural delivery for doing things. But the Roth stuff is a little bit out of my league, so it was the one I had to. I really had to get down in the trenches and work on that one to make the presentation come out the way I was happy with it.
Yeah, it really was. May 3rd, 1976, Aerosmith releases Rocks. Many people think it's their greatest album. I would go with Toys in the Attic personally. Talk to me a little bit about covering Aerosmith, but also is Toys in the Attic an underrated Aerosmith classic in terms of album, not just song? Let's start off with Mark.
I don't think so. That might be one of their, at least in my opinion, not assumed. I always thought it was one of their more famous albums. simply because of the track listing. If you look at that track listing on that album, I mean, it's loaded. It's absolutely loaded. You have, number one, you have Sweet Emotion. That was a huge, huge hit for them. Walk This Way, another huge hit for them. During that, especially mid-'70s, I think Toys in the Attic came out in 75, if I'm not mistaken.
It did. 1975. Yeah.
So if you think back, or you look back, or you watch movies, Walk This Way, Sweet Emotion, those two songs right there, even Uncle Salty to a certain degree. I've always thought of that record as being their quintessential record. That's my personal opinion. Obviously music is all opinionated. Rocks is a great record. Don't get me wrong. But I always looked at Toys being the more popular record. I won't say better, but more popular.
See, I agree with you. I posted recently for the anniversary of Rocks that it was the second best Aerosmith record after Toys, and boy, did people not like that comment. Bobby, how do you see this thing? Is Toys in the Attic a better, for the lack of a better word, album than Rocks? And why pick that song? There's so many songs to go through from Aerosmith. What attracted you to Toys in the Attic?
I didn't pick that tune. That was Mike Portnoy's pick. Also,
I like Mike Portnoy. He picks the greatest songs. He is fantastic. But go ahead. The
idea of the project itself wasn't to sit there and discuss any of the picks. The game was do it if the other guy picks it. Each guy had two picks. Would I have picked this song? Probably not. I probably wouldn't have picked this song. But for sure, I understood the relevance of having an Aerosmith cut on this tune. And I never thought of this specific cut as being. I'm not going to say it's a deep cut. It's obviously the name of the record. It's the title track of the record. But the point is that for sure it's not Walk This Way or Dream On. It's something I think that represents what could be closest to that raw, gritty, snotty, almost underground feel that Aerosmith had to them. Not the hit machine that they became, but that rock and roll band out of Boston kind of a thing that gave them legs. And that was when it was raw, gritty, and let's say challenging with regard to what the definition of pop was in the day.
You see, it's funny about, you look at Toys in the Attic, I look at it as more of their pop record, and Rocks as more of the not underground, but lesser known. Because if you look at songs like Rats in the Cellar and Last Child,
Nobody's Fault.
Yeah, it's amazing, but those songs didn't have the notoriety as Sweet Emotion and Walk This Way did. As far as popularity goes, if you're judging by numbers and the popular opinion, it has to be. I would assume Toys in the Attic. But again, I'm just coming out of my little bubble here in New York. So,
hey, listen, I didn't hear Run DMC cover Nobody's Fault, so that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Now, it is clear that to me that Mike Portnoy has absolute terrific musical taste. Would you let him pick the next 10 songs for the next album? Just throwing that out there.
No, there would be no fun then. It would be, everybody wants to have that. This was the idea of this thing was to some degree make it a game, to make it a challenge. Now the challenge was going to be that I knew the two songs I was going to pick, but maybe they were going to be challenging to the other three members. I know Phil Demmel, for instance, said I never even heard Never in My Life, the Mountain song that I had picked. So he had to go and be exposed to that the first time. Now when Phil picked Tattoo Vampire and DOA by Van Halen, I was obviously familiar with the songs, but I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd ever be presenting these songs in kind of a thrash type mode. I didn't know them cold. I knew American Band cold. I knew the Mountain song cold, the Ted song I knew. But this was the fun of doing this, there's the challenge. It was not like, oh, listen, man, I really don't want to do that one. If he picked them, I had to do them. So I do think that the way that this became fun for us was not just an absolute comfort zone, because if I picked all 10 songs, I would pick 10 that I was cut for. But this way, I had to kind of transpose myself into what somebody else's idea of the song was, and that's what that's where this became exciting for us as musicians and recording the tunes.
Yeah.
You know, Last Rites would be a cool tune to do, though. Now that I think about it.
Which one? But all right,
Can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear
Not
you.
Last Rites. I mean, Last Child. Last Child would be a good tune to do.
Last Child would be great. All right, let me just quickly talk about Mike Portnoy. Here's a guy who has been in Sons of Apollo, Dream Theater, Twisted Sister, just one of the greatest musicians out there, and incredibly nice. Every time I've met him, he's been exceptionally nice. Talk to me about Mark, just about his proficiency as a drummer and the person.
Yeah, it's Mike Portnoy, right? He's on a lot of different projects, a lot of different bands. He likes to keep busy, especially today in today's world. We're all trying to find our ways. It's unfortunately or fortunately, it depends on how one looks at it. It's not like it used to be where he's not in Dream Theater anymore. So how do you sustain? And I think he found a beautiful home with the Winery Dogs, which is a phenomenal band. Billy and Richie are two world-class musicians in their own right, and I think those three really hit something special when they got together. Obviously he has that, and then Sons of Apollo again. Now he added 4 more world-class musicians. So he knows how to surround himself by musicianship, which is a great thing.
Absolutely. Bobby, I'll throw this at you. One of the greatest American bands, especially in the 1970s, was Kiss. Absent from this album, why was no Kiss song considered?
Too obvious. Too obvious. I think that just when I explained that, Phil Demmel, who's pretty much from that era, I think I just saw a picture of him holding a guitar in 1972 or something when he sent it into the record company. Said he wasn't familiar with that mountain tune that I just mentioned. So the idea of this was not to necessarily pick, Rock and Roll All Night or She or stuff off of Alive. It was to get a little bit deeper, into that gritty Aerosmith, into the Screamin' Teddy, into Cactus. So let's say the obvious was. It wasn't a rule to exclude the obvious, but it seemed to be the trend as we were picking the songs was to exclude the obvious cuts or bands.
All right, I'll give you that. Mark, Metal Allegiance Volume 2, Power of Drunk Majesty came out a couple of years ago. Where are you in terms of a new album, and is the project an ongoing concern, or at some point do you say, okay, we've had enough? Where do you see Metal Allegiance going?
Writing, it's what I do. It's my creative outlet, if you will. All these guys have their, let me backtrack. The writing team of MA, we do this because it's a creative outlet, for us. When you look at, Testament, Chuck and Eric Peterson, they're primarily the writers in Testament. You look at Megadeth, Mustaine is the primary writer of Megadeth, and for me, this is, Metal Allegiance is my primary writing source. So to be able to write with, the likes of Alex or Dave or whomever, it's awesome. And they love it too, because again, you're not hearing Skolnick rhythms or Skolnick songs on those Testament records. They have a beautiful formula that works for Testament, which is great, but Alex, he wants to write it as well, the metal, and obviously with his jazz trio. So MA is a great creative outlet for us. And that's how Bobby and I hit it off. We co-wrote a song together for MA, and without that, we wouldn't be here having this conversation, and this record wouldn't exist if it wasn't for MA and if it wasn't for that chemistry in writing. So that's not going to stop, and MA is certainly not going to stop. Alex and I are right now, we're trading riffs back and forth and starting to plan the next record. So I would think at some point at the end of this year, we'll start taking it a bit more seriously. But at this point in time, I'm focusing obviously on this release. It's coming out in June. So that's getting my undivided attention. But, I would say mid to end of the summer, we'll get those gears really turning for MA.
Oh, I look forward to it. And of course, Bobby, The Wings of War, Overkill's album from last year, considered one of the best of 2019. Normally you would be on the touring cycle and still working it, but because of what's going on, it's been cut short. Does Overkill sort of get back into the studio right now and say, well, since we got nothing else to do, let's make a new album? Where are we in terms of the band?
We've always run on kind of a schedule. It's been our visibility. I think it keeps us sharp. We're 9 songs deep at this point. It's something, there's some, to be able to face some let's say unsure times that not only Overkill, but the entire world is going through at this particular time. Business as usual is a good medicine. So I'm sitting here looking at my tablet. I've got Bluetooth speaker hooked up. I've been working on demos with the other boys. And again, business as usual. And I would assume a release in approximately a year. So 2021. And that will be, I think, record number 20. And I'd like to think that he who dies with the most toys wins. So that's
as long as they're not in the attic. And
that's correct.
And how many albums next year are going to be called Business as Usual, do you think? That's actually not a bad title for some of these. All right. Guys, an absolute pleasure. I've always enjoyed seeing both of you live in different contexts and different shows and different festivals. And this new American Made, it's going to be the shot of kick-ass rock and roll we're going to need this summer. So thank you for that. Merci, as we say in Montreal.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, bro. That was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll have this up this week.
Great.
Thanks, man.
Hey, man. Thank you.
Cheers. À la prochaine. Bye-bye now. Cheers.
This has been Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. For more exclusive content and interviews, subscribe on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, and many more. Follow Mitch on all the socials, especially Twitter, @Mitch Lafon, and on Instagram, @Mitch_Lafon. Get your Mitch merch now at loudtracks.com/Mitch.